Hello and welcome to Son of a Glitch. Join us as we explore some of the internet's craziest glitch stories. Story 1. I've never been one to believe in strange phenomena. Ghosts, UFOs, time travel. Those were things I left for science fiction books and late-night radio callers. I was a practical university student in 1991, studying economics at a small but respectable school in Halifax, Nova Scotia. My life back then was a mix of lectures, part-time jobs, microwave dinners, and long hours in the campus library. I didn't have time, or the inclination, for the weird or unexplained. But all that changed on a cold Saturday afternoon in March. I was heading home to visit my parents in the Annapolis Valley, a few hours away by bus. I'd done this trip dozens of times before. I knew every curve in the highway like the back of my hand. It was just another routine ride home, until it wasn't. The bus that day was one of the older school-style models they sometimes used on rural routes. Yellow, a little rickety, with that familiar smell of vinyl seats and engine oil. I took a spot near the back, as I usually did, wanting to be left alone with my headphones and thoughts. There weren't many passengers, just a family sitting near the front, a man, woman, and two kids chattering away in French, I think. I didn't pay much attention to them at first. The ride was uneventful for the most part. We passed the usual landmarks, old gas stations, frozen lakes, the rusting skeleton of a long-shut drive-in theater. I was half asleep, head against the window, when we started climbing the hill near the Michelin tire factory. That place was always a marker for me, a sign that we were about 20 minutes from my parents' place. I remember glancing out and seeing the familiar smokestacks and the pale yellow building nestled between the trees. Everything looked normal. Then came the feeling. It was subtle at first, like a shiver across my skin, but from the inside out. I suddenly felt very aware of myself, hyper-aware, like I was being watched. The air around me felt thicker somehow, not physically, but emotionally. That's the best way I can describe it. Cold and dense, like the space around me had shifted. And then, this is the part that still messes with my head. I started imagining people laughing at me. Not just any laughter. It was specific, cruel, like a chorus of strangers mocking me for something I hadn't done. It made no sense. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't dreaming. I was just sitting there, staring out the window, and suddenly my brain was filled with the sound of laughter. I blinked. Once. Maybe twice. And then the bus was back on the highway, but we were no longer where we had just been. We were a full mile behind the Michelin factory, approaching it again. My heart skipped. I looked around, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I had dozed off, missed a turn, but I couldn't shake the certainty that we had just passed this landmark. I had seen it. I had marked it in my mind, as I always did. I sat upright and looked around. The family near the front, who had been chattering away before, were now dead silent. The father stared straight ahead. The kids had stopped fidgeting. The mother was clutching her purse tightly, staring at nothing. I felt my skin crawl. Something wasn't right. I waited until we pulled into the next rest stop, a small gas station about 5 minutes down the road, and approached the driver. He was an older guy with a bushy mustache and tired eyes, the kind you'd expect to see in a Tim Hortons commercial. I hesitated before speaking. What was I even going to say? Hey, quick question, I said. Did we, by any chance, pass the Michelin factory twice? He looked at me for a long second. His hand froze over the dashboard, mid-reach for his thermos. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, then back to me. There was something in his expression, recognition maybe, or fear. Things like that, he muttered, can happen sometimes. Then he turned away and started fiddling with the radio. That was it. No explanation. No follow-up. Just that cryptic sentence and silence. I went back to my seat, but I couldn't relax. The rest of the ride passed in a fog of questions. I kept replaying the moment in my head. The hill, the laughter, the sudden shift. Had I imagined it? Had we all imagined it? And if we had, why did the family go silent at the exact same moment? Why did the driver look like I'd just told him the punchline to a joke he didn't want to hear? When I got home, I didn't mention it to my parents. I didn't want to sound crazy. But that night, lying in my old bedroom with the hum of the baseboard heater filling the silence, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking, what if we had somehow slipped? Just a little. Just for a moment. What if time isn't as fixed as we think it is? Story 2. Something happened back in the fall of 1994 that I still can't explain. And believe me, I've tried. That evening started like any other. It was a Friday, and my boyfriend Jim and I were heading back to our house in Fallbrook, California. We'd been in Oceanside for dinner, and we're driving north along Mission Road. If you've ever driven that stretch, you know it's nothing fancy, just a two-lane road that curves through the hills and avocado groves. It's well-traveled, even for a small town like ours. You usually pass at least a few cars every mile. That night, though, everything felt still. Too still. We just turned onto Mission Road when I glanced at the stereo clock. It read 6:24 p.m. The orange glow of the digital display was bright in the fading daylight. I don't know why, but I remember that exact time. We had about 10 minutes to go until we reached our place, and I remember thinking how odd it was that we hadn't passed a single car coming the other way since merging onto the road. Not one. It struck me enough that I said it out loud. "Hey," I said, frowning. "Isn't it weird that no one's driving the other way?" Jim glanced at me, then back at the road. "Yeah," he said. "Now that you mention it, it's a little strange. Usually we pass half a dozen cars by now." I nodded and looked out the passenger window. The road was empty, the hills darkening with shadows. The only sounds were the tires humming against the pavement and the occasional chirp of crickets starting up for the night. That's when it happened. Without warning, the car just died. I don't mean it sputtered or slowed down. I mean everything shut off. The engine cut out, the dashboard went black, the headlights blinked off, and the power steering vanished. It was like the car had been yanked out of existence for a second. "What the hell?" I started, but Jim was already reacting. He gripped the wheel and coasted us onto a wide dirt turnout just ahead. We came to a stop in the gravel, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "What just happened?" he asked, frowning. "Did we run out of gas?" "No way," I said. "We had half a tank when we left." I double-checked before we got on the freeway. He nodded slowly, then stepped out of the car. I stayed in my seat, confused, listening to the sudden silence. It was like the world had dropped a cotton sheet over everything. No insects, no wind, no distant cars. Just stillness. Jim came around to my side and opened the door. "Switch seats," he said. "I'll try cranking it." I slid over to the passenger side, still dazed. Jim got in and turned the key. The car roared back to life like nothing had happened. The lights came on, the dashboard lit up, and the engine purred like it always had. We looked at each other. "No way, that was just a stall," he muttered. We pulled back onto the road and continued driving in silence. I felt jumpy. I kept glancing at the clock on the stereo, just to anchor myself. When I finally looked again, it read 6:36. I blinked. 12 minutes had passed. I double-checked. We'd pulled over only a minute or two ago, 3 at most. But the clock showed a full 12 minutes gone. I didn't say anything right away. I wasn't sure what to say, but I could feel that something had shifted. Jim must have felt it, too, because he kept checking the rearview mirror like he expected something to be following us. We didn't talk much the rest of the way home. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying the moment the car died. The way everything just cut out. The feeling of being pulled through something. Not physically, but mentally. Like my mind had slipped sideways for a second, like a record skipping on a turntable. I kept thinking, where did those 12 minutes go? The next day, I checked the car. No mechanical issues. Battery was fine. Fuel line was fine. Jim even took it to a mechanic the following week, just to be sure. They couldn't find a single thing wrong. Over the years, I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a glitch in the clock. Maybe we did stall, and my sense of time was just off. But deep down, I know that's not the answer. Because I remember how it felt. It wasn't just the car dying. It was the entire world pressing pause for a moment. Like the road, the hills, the sky, all of it stopped moving. And then, without warning, someone hit play again. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if we'd gotten out of the car. What we would have seen. Or if we'd waited longer. Or if we hadn't stopped at all. I've never had another experience like that, and neither has Jim. We've never talked about it much since. But every time we drive that road, every time we hit that curve, I grip the armrest just a little tighter. And I always check the clock. Story 3. I was just a girl back then, maybe 10 years old, maybe 11. Time didn't move the same way in those days, not out in the country where we lived. Everything was slower, quieter, and somehow more permanent. We didn't have electricity in our house yet, and our days were shaped by the sun and the seasons, not clocks or calendars. That's probably why the memory of that day has stuck with me so clearly all these years later. It didn't feel like time at all. It felt like something else stepping in and borrowing the afternoon. We lived near Roro, Alabama. Most people have never heard of it, and I wouldn't blame them. Back then, it was barely a town, just a scattering of farms, a church, and one dusty general store where you could buy flour, lye soap, and penny candy if you were lucky. No phones, no cars, unless someone passed through from the city. Mostly it was wagons and horses. You could hear a team coming a mile off by the sound of the wheels crunching over the dry red dirt. The Hawkins family lived a few miles up the road from us, and they had the biggest front porch I'd ever seen. It was wide and shaded by a tin roof, with creaky steps and a swing that groaned every time someone sat on it. That porch was where us women and children gathered to shell peas and beans when the harvest came in. It was hot work, but it was social, and it gave us something to do with our hands while we talked and swapped stories. That afternoon, it must have been July or August. The sun was high and mean, and the air was thick enough to chew. I remember my palms were stained green from the peas, and the big galvanized washtub in front of us was already half full. We had maybe 6 or 7 women on the porch, and twice as many children playing in the yard or helping out. We'd been at it since morning, and by mid-afternoon, everyone was sticky with sweat and just a little cranky. And then we saw him. Mr. Hawkins was riding up the road toward the house, slow and steady on his old beige mule, just like always. He had a big white cloth sack of flour slung across the front of the saddle and a brown paper bag tucked in the crook of his left arm. I remember seeing the sun glint off the top of a tin can poking out of the bag, probably coffee or syrup. He looked calm, content even, like a man who'd done this ride 100 times and knew every bump in the road. He reached the gate and stopped, just like he always did. One of the Hawkins boys, can't remember which one, ran to open it for him, and then he disappeared. I mean that literally. 1 second he was there, clear as day, and the next second gone. Not behind a tree, not turned around. Vanished. Right in front of us. Like someone had erased him with a pencil. We were stunned into silence at first. It was as if the porch lost all its sound. The kids stopped playing. The women stopped shelling. Someone gasped, maybe Mrs. Hawkins, and then the screaming started. Not from fear exactly, though there was some of that, but from complete confusion, like the world had tilted and we couldn't find our footing. I remember Mrs. Hawkins dropping her bowl of peas, and the peas rolled across the porch like little green marbles. She stood up and clutched her apron to her chest, staring at the empty gate. The boy who'd run to open it was frozen mid-step, eyes wide. We waited. Minutes passed. Nothing. Finally, when it seemed like the spell had broken, someone said, "Maybe we imagined it." But the thing was, we hadn't. We all saw the same thing. Mr. Hawkins, with his sack of flour and his grocery bag, riding up to the gate just like always, and then nothing. Mrs. Hawkins sent one of the older boys to close the gate, and we went back to shelling peas, though no one really talked much after that. The rhythm was gone. There was a tension in the air, like thunder waiting just beyond the hills. About 30 minutes later, I looked up, and there he was again. Mr. Hawkins, riding down the same road, same pace, same mule. Same white sack across the saddle, same brown bag in his arm. He reached the gate, stopped, and looked at us expectantly. Only this time nobody moved. We all just stared at him, frozen. Even the kids were too spooked to say anything. It was like watching a replay of a film, except we weren't sure if it was real or not. Finally, Mr. Hawkins called out, "Well, is someone going to open this gate for me?" His voice cracked the silence like a whip. The boy, same one as before, moved slowly, cautiously, as if afraid touching the gate would make everything vanish again. But it didn't. Mr. Hawkins rode through, tied off his mule, and climbed the porch steps like nothing happened. He said hello to his wife, kissed one of the babies on the head, and went inside. Later that evening, when the sun dipped low and the porch cast long shadows across the yard, I asked Mama if what we saw could have been a trick. Maybe the heat or our tired eyes played with us. But she just shook her head and said, "Sometimes the world gets strange, and sometimes it don't give you a reason." I never forgot that day. I've thought about it more times than I can count. Was it a glimpse into the future? A momentary shift in reality? A time loop? I don't know. I still don't know. All I do know is that Mr. Hawkins got there before he arrived. And none of us ever looked at that road the same way again. Story 4. I was about 8 years old when it happened. Just a regular kid on a regular day, playing outside like I always did. That afternoon, I was sitting in the front yard with my friend Jake. It was summer, hot enough that the pavement felt soft under your sneakers, but not hot enough to keep us indoors. We'd been playing some made-up game involving action figures and sidewalk chalk, but mostly, We were just watching the other kids ride their bikes up and down the long driveway that sloped into the cul-de-sac. It was one of those lazy days where nothing much happens, and then something really strange does. I remember the sun was starting to angle lower in the sky, casting long shadows from the telephone poles. Jake and I were sitting in the grass, sipping from juice boxes, when we both looked up at the same time. A dark blue sedan was coming down the street, slowly, like it was looking for a specific house. It turned and pulled into the driveway of the house 2 doors down from mine. We watched as a boy, maybe around our age, opened the back door and jumped out. He was wearing a red t-shirt and shorts. I remember that clearly, red shirt, white socks, and those Velcro sneakers that were popular back then. He ran up to the front door of the house, yelling in that high-pitched, excited way little kids do. Something like, "Mom, I'm here," or "Guess what I got?" I can't remember the exact words, but I remember the tone. Loud, cheerful, chaotic. A minute later, a girl on a pink bike with streamers on the handlebars zoomed down the driveway. She had a plastic basket on the front of her bike and a purple helmet strapped crookedly under her chin. She rode down the hill, turned left at the sidewalk, and disappeared out of view. It all seemed so normal. But then it happened again. I don't mean something similar happened. I mean the exact same thing happened again. Same blue car. Same driveway. Same boy in the red shirt jumping out of the same door and yelling the exact same thing. Same girl on the same bike, same crooked helmet, riding down the same hill. I just sat there, stunned. I turned to Jake, half expecting him to laugh or say, "Whoa, did you see that?" But he was just as pale as I felt. "Did that just happen twice?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, that was weird." We didn't talk about it much after that. I think we were both too confused to even process it. Kids don't always have the language to explain things like that. We just sort of shrugged it off and went back to our game, but the moment stuck with me. It's been years, decades even, and I still remember it vividly. I've gone over it in my head so many times, trying to think of a logical explanation. Maybe the first time was a daydream? But no, Jake saw it too. Maybe it was twins. A prank? A coincidence? But it wasn't just similar, it was identical. The same car. The same kid. The same shout. Like someone hit rewind and play again. As I got older and started reading about strange phenomena, I learned there's a name for this kind of thing. A time loop, or a time echo, or retrocausality. But none of those terms really help. They sound scientific, but they don't explain why a boy got out of a car twice, or why the world repeated itself for 30 seconds on a sleepy summer afternoon. I never found out who that family was. They moved away a year or 2 later, and I never saw the boy in the red shirt again. But sometimes I wonder if he remembers that day too. If he noticed anything at all. Or if, from his point of view, everything unfolded just once. That day made me pay more attention to the world around me. I don't mean I became paranoid or anything, but I started watching more closely, noticing patterns, waiting for the world to stutter again. Story 5. I was 6 years old when it happened, and I've never been able to forget it. Not because it was frightening, exactly, but because it made no sense. It didn't then, and it still doesn't now, even after all these years. I've spent a lifetime turning it over in my mind, trying to fit it into something rational. But some things, no matter how long you live, just don't fit. It was the early 1950s, and I lived in Stoke-on-Trent, a factory town in England where nothing much ever happened. The streets were lined with soot-stained brick houses, and the air always carried a hint of coal smoke and damp earth. Kids like me spent most of our time outdoors, running down alleys, kicking around old tennis balls, and getting up to harmless mischief. That morning, I was walking to school with my mate Graham. We took the same shortcut we always did, cutting through a partially developed area where builders were working on a new row of houses. It was a chilly spring morning, and I remember the smell of fresh mortar and sawdust hanging in the air. The builders were hammering and shouting, their voices carrying over the half-finished walls. We slowed down for a moment to watch them work. At that age, construction sites felt like the most fascinating places on Earth, so full of movement, noise, and men who looked like giants to us. But just beyond the building site, tucked between 2 lots, was something out of place, a small stone cottage that neither of us had ever noticed before. It was odd, really. Graham and I had taken that route countless times. We knew every brick pile, every skip bin, every muddy puddle. But this cottage, this squat little house with a thatched roof and ivy crawling up the walls, was new to us. Except it didn't look new. It looked ancient, like it had been there for 100 years. We stopped in our tracks. Was that here yesterday? I asked. Graham shrugged. Dunno. Maybe we just never noticed it. But we had. I was sure of it. As we stood there staring, the front door opened, and an old woman stepped out. She wore a long dress and a faded apron, her gray hair pulled back into a bun. There was something kind in her face, something warm. She looked at us and smiled. "Would you lads like a drink?" she asked. "Lemonade." We looked at each other. My mum would have said no, of course. You don't go into strangers' houses. But this was the 1950s, and the world felt different. Safer, maybe. Or maybe we were just more trusting. We followed her inside. The cottage was small but cozy. There was a fire crackling in a stone hearth, and the room smelled of bread and lavender. She gave us lemonade in tall glasses and asked us to sit. I remember the glass felt thick and too big for my hand. Graham giggled when he nearly spilled his. We didn't stay long, maybe 10 minutes. She asked us our names, told us hers was Mrs. Dovey, and said she used to be a teacher. She even offered us a biscuit each, which we accepted eagerly. When we left the cottage, the sun had moved higher in the sky. We walked the rest of the way to school, laughing and talking about how strange and lovely the little house was. But when we got to the school gates, everything felt off. The playground was empty. The bell had long since rung. A teacher on duty looked startled to see us. "Where have you two been?" she asked sharply. We told her we'd come the usual way, and that we'd stopped for a few minutes at a woman's house near the building site. She frowned. "You left home at 1:30. It's nearly 4 o'clock. We were stunned. What should have been a 20-minute walk had somehow taken over 2 hours. That evening, both our parents were furious. They thought we'd been skipping school, wandering town, getting into who knows what. We tried to explain, but it only made things worse. "There's no cottage there," my father said. "Only the new houses going up. I passed by just the other day. But we knew what we saw." Of course, the next morning we went back. Graham and I left early and took the exact same route. The construction site was still there, the builders hammering away as usual. But the cottage? Gone. Not a trace of it. Not even a patch of disturbed ground where it might have stood. We checked every inch of that block. Nothing. Just piles of bricks, half-framed walls, and the smell of wet cement. We never saw the old woman again. I've thought about her so many times over the years. Who is she? How did we lose nearly 2 hours in what felt like 10 minutes? And why was there no sign of the cottage when we went back? As I got older, I read about things like time slips, moments when people step into the past or future without meaning to. Some call them hallucinations. Some call them glitches in reality. I don't know. I'm not a scientist or a philosopher. I'm just a man who, once upon a time, drank lemonade in a house that shouldn't have been there. Graham remembers it too. We've only talked about it a handful of times as adults. Once over a pint, he said, "You know, I still dream of that cottage sometimes. It's always warm and smells like baking. I wake up feeling like I've been somewhere real." I do too. Maybe it really was a house from the past. Maybe it was a memory caught in time. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a moment meant only for us.